So our first panelist is Rosa Elena Artega, and the title of her presentation is Immigration Policy Does Not Recognize the Spectrum of Violence Against Women. Rosa Elena is widely passionate about her work, which is framed in a narrative, feminist, anti-oppression practice. She is an active agent of change towards eradicating violence against women and girls. She has been the manager of direct service and clinical practice with Battered Women Support Services for the last 10 years. Rosa Elena has been working in the anti-violence field for over 15 years, delivering workshops on gender violence to service providers to a provincial and national level. Rosa Elena has integrated progressive practices into her work with non-status, refugee, immigrant women, and women with precarious status. Welcome, Rosa Elena.
Hi, thanks for coming. I have to say that a lot of the things I'm going to share are based in my practice. I do frontline work, and I have worked in the past in transition houses. I'm an immigrant woman myself, and so I want to acknowledge that I'm going to talk about girls and women, and that we live in a heterosexual structure, dominant structure, but I also want to acknowledge that people identify, they have other gender identities, and if you don't feel included, it's because my main work is to work with girls and women who self-identify as women, so I want to make that clear. And also, some of my political views are based in my personal experience working with immigrant women, so maybe it's going to be hard for some people to hear my political views. So I need to see this. Sorry, I'm going to. So there are attitudes and laws that facilitate violence against girls and women, and immigration law being one of them. I consider this law racist, sexist, and classist. So I also, as Rupalim said, I need to acknowledge that this land, Canada, was colonized, and that the people who came here first as settlers were men. And from there, they created laws, right? And the laws were created to control people more than satisfy or meet the needs of people, right? And immigration law is one of them. And through this presentation, I think that maybe you are going to understand why I consider this law racist, classist, and sexist. So we understand and we know that a lot of, and I'm going to talk in general about immigrant women, but that is going to include women with non-status, precarious immigration status, just to be faster in my presentation. We know that a lot of women experience violence in their home countries, in their intimate relationship, and that when they come here, they carry that violence in the sense that there are gender roles that determine who is submissive and who is the dominant in that role. So in Canada, however, for many immigrant women, the complexities of dynamics of abuse and violence increase under the discriminatory attitudes and gender bias laws that women have to navigate. So when we talk about refugee women who have to go to the refugee hearing, when we talk about intimate violence, sometimes we think that it's just this isolated case, and in the community, in society, we have these ideas about, oh, well, you know, she experienced that violence, why she doesn't get over, right? Like, now she's in Canada, she should be happy. Or why she doesn't leave, right? And I always say that when you're in an abusive relationship, you don't leave the abusive relationship. You can leave this theater, you can leave a restaurant, but when women are in an abusive relationship, they escape, you know, and that's the difference. So when we think about violence against women, when we think about gender violence, I think that is very important first that we don't exclude ourselves. And if we think about the statistics and we know that 1 in 3 women has experienced violence in a lifetime, and we, in this room, we count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, I just want you to know that, it's important that we don't think about this issue as those women, poor women, I want to help them, good for you that you do that work. That's one thing. And the other thing is that I'm going to show you this spiral, and I know that as women, we react to this. So what I want to say is that from the moment that we are born and we are assigned as our gender identity, female or a woman, a lot of us, depending what is our social location, will face gender violence, right? From the moment if you are allowed to be born or not. And if you can see in this spiral, and I'm not going to go into detail through all of these, right? Sexual abuse is all over our woman's history. You know, as a child who gets to go to school, who is used as a labor, you know, issues of incest are higher in girls. As teenager, you know, arranged marriage, forced marriage, pregnancy between child and teenager pregnancy, you know, sexual transmitted diseases from young adult to adult women and elders, intimate violence, women are trafficked, you know, if you are living in extreme poverty, sometimes you have to exchange sex for having a way to survive. So I just want you to see this spiral and stay with your body. Just acknowledge that doesn't apply to all women, depending if you are a racialized woman, if you come from an oppressed country, depending your social class, that will increase this. And I work with, I have a support group for Latin American women. And one day we created the spiral without the content inside, and I asked them, right, to share some of the experience and how they had resisted and how they had survived. And it was amazing because it was exactly this spiral. So when we talk about immigration law, what I did was to think about the different status or non-status that women have and how that impacts their lives. So I started talking with the new regulations that some people call it the marriage fraud. And as you know, in media, a lot of us, including immigrant people, were convinced that that law, those changes in the regulations were good because, you know, we don't want all these immigrants to come to this country and to abuse the system, right? So if you think about that spiral, you know, women will do anything they can do to survive, but also because they have been oppressed and dominated, it will be easy to convince them that I have good intentions to marry someone and to bring that person into my country and that life will be better, and once that she is here is trapped, right? So the marriage of fraud and the conditional permanent residency are symptoms of this prevalent disposition of neglect and abuse that immigrant women suffer in the Canadian society. The sponsor spouse must cohabit and legitimate relationship with her sponsor for 2 years from the day on which they receive their permanent residency. And as you know, a lot of us, and I can see here many service providers, we are not going to give up. We will help every woman who comes to us for support. And this is the law, but also we can have some of us access to lawyers, analyze the law, argue domestic violence. But also I have seen in my practice that not everybody is willing to put that time to support women because it requires a lot of time and requires for some lawyers even to do it pro bono, and there are not many who are willing to do it. So the family class is another way to enter into Canada, and this is very difficult for women, right? Because it's based in the point system, so it's based in education. If the person speaks English or French, I know in Latin America, unless you are rich or middle class, then you won't speak English. Age, work experience, adaptability, arranged employment, and also the duration if you are sponsored by your husband, by your partner, so then he's supposed to sponsor you for 3 years, right? And what we have seen in relationships is that this is used to abuse women and control women. So I'm supposed to sponsor you, and if you leave me, then you are going to get deported. We know that of course, we can support women and that doesn't happen. But I have met with women who were in the relationship for 10 years, didn't know their rights, didn't know that we existed as a serving provider organization, and they really thought that that she had to be with her sponsor for 10 years, right? Sometimes he makes up also the time. And with elder abuse, as you saw in that spiral, also we have been working with many elder women who experience abuse by their children, and they were brought to take care of the grandchildren. So also they are trapped, and it's very difficult for them to leave. So I know that people are going to talk about this, so I'm going to be short about the Living Caregiver program. So a lot of women go through hardship to being able to be eligible to come here as a living caregiver. So they have to live in the employer's home for 2 years. So I just let you think about the things that can happen in that house, from sexual harassment, rape. All these experiences have been shared with me, and women just letting it go, right? Because they have children in their country who are waiting for them to send them money, because they came with the dream that if they were able to stay 2 years, then they will be able to bring their family later on and get some access to some status. Mail order brides, also I have worked with many mail order brides, and the Canadian mainstream sometimes think that this is a joke. That is not true. However, happens more often than not. So there are not good statistics on how many mail order brides there are in Canada since most arrived through the family section of federal immigration policy. In some cases, mail order marriages are the only alternative for women living in poverty and whom do not meet the education and qualification standards required by the Canadian immigration laws. Mail order brides coming to Canada will most likely face exploitation at the hands of abusive husbands. In Canada, there are not specific rules to control agencies and not specific provisions to ensure that brides know their rights. This commodification of women is akin to human trafficking. Refugee claimants, as you know, there are many categories to apply as refugee claimant, but I want to talk about the gender persecution because those are the cases that come to my attention. So for gender persecution, as you know, refugee claims are not easy to make, mainly with applications from designated countries, right? Now with the changes, with the regulations, if the woman is escaping, is fleeing from violence in her home country, she has to first to demonstrate that this is true. She has to show police records, she has to show hospital records, she has to talk about the trauma. So if you think about that spiral, you know, I work with women providing counseling, and it takes sometimes more than a year for her to disclose the sexual abuse and all the kinds of abuse that she has experienced. So it's not going to take for her 15 days first to expose everything, because also sometimes the memory is trauma impacts us in many ways, right? So the woman doesn't remember in the moment, or she doesn't even know that in that moment she can share those kind of things, right? So she has 15 days to gather information. I am from Mexico, and I have worked with many women from Mexico whose refugee claims have been denied. And they are told that it's because in Mexico we have democracy and there are perfect laws to protect them. And coming from Mexico, I can tell you that, I don't know, there is the law and there is the application of the law, and police will laugh if someone calls them, right, for an issue of domestic violence. And I know you have come across to many cases where the woman is told that if she goes to a different town, then the abuser won't find her, so then she's sent back. And I know at least 2 women who came to Vancouver, their application was denied, and then they went back to Mexico and they were killed there. And it's already in the news, it's documented. Humanitarian and compassionate grounds, also as we know, it's very hard to get it. And the woman has to demonstrate that she has been working here, that she doesn't have family connections in her country. She has to show some stability. For some women who make the first application, they are not allowed to work. So I have cases where the man kidnapped the child, brought the child to Canada, applied for custody of the child, made up lies, The court, of course, believed him. Then now he has custody of the child. The woman comes to look for her child. And then she applies for humanitarian and compassionate grounds, but she is not allowed to work. So in many cases where the woman still wants to fight to get her child, she works under the table. And I have had cases where the partner finds out and he calls immigration and she gets deported without her child, right? And this is one just example of many examples. And women without status, I'm not going to go into detail the different ways that women can be without a status or precarious immigration status, but a lot of these situations are attached to being left by a person, or being dependent of a man. So temporary resident visa, temporary resident permit, women who made refugee claimants and are rejected and then they decide that they don't want to leave the country because it's dangerous for them to go back to their country. Women who apply as refugees, but the main person who was escaping from torture or persecution was her partner, and then she had to leave the partner. So now that application doesn't apply to her. And just to end, I want to share with you this huge issue that I have come across is criminalization of women. So for the last years, I started noticing that women were arrested. And I noticed case after case, so I decided to start collecting that information and ask for women for permission to collect their information. So in 4 years, I have collected 70 cases. And I'm bringing it here because the majority of women who have been arrested are immigrant women or women with precarious immigration status. So I'm just going to share what I found through collecting these cases. So 80% out of these incidents, the women were immigrant, refugee women with precarious immigration status or racialized women. A percent of the women responded to the violence in self-defense. So this percentage of women who were arrested, at the time they were arrested, whether they were fighting back or they didn't do anything at all, was the man who called the police. A percentage of the women did not speak English at the time of their arrest. A percentage of women who were not provided with an interpreter at the time of their arrest. And the woman did not disclose the partner abuse because maybe they were refugee claimants and she didn't want to share that he had started the violence. 80% of these incidents, the men had Canadian citizenship, and a percentage of, in these incidents, the men had permanent resident status. 100% of these cases, there was a history of violence and abuse against the woman. 80% of these cases, the woman was trying to leave the relationship at the time that the incident happened. A percentage of these cases where the woman had children, her children were apprehended. A percentage of these cases where the woman had to live in a shelter while the abusive partner lived in the family home. A percentage of these cases where the woman had to navigate the intersection of immigration law, family law, criminal justice system, and child protection. 100% of the cases, there is a criminal record, even if their charges were dropped. So what happened is that when women have to ask for their criminal record, doesn't say that she committed a crime, but in that record it says that she was engaged with the criminal justice system, right? And many employers ask the woman why she has that in her record. So just to end, I want to share an example of many cases of where women are criminalized, but going back to that spiral of violence. So I had a recent case where the woman came to see me. She came 5 years ago, she came to Canada. How she came to Canada is from Africa, from Rwanda. So her mother applied as refugee, she got accepted, and as you know, take long time for mothers to bring their children. Finally, after a couple of years, she was able to join her mother. When she came, she was 16 years old. Her mother was living with a Canadian partner, a white man. He used to beat up the partner, and also when she came, he tried to sexual assault the girl, and he also used to beat up the girl at that time. At some point, he was beating her up. And he had her like that, and he was beating her up. So then she got, pepper shaker that has something on top. And then she did that and hit him on the head. And then he started bleeding. So she went and got the phone right away. She called 911 and told them, please send the police and an ambulance. And she had bruises. She was beat up too. So when the police came, they didn't interview her. They didn't ask her her side of the story. She got arrested. He went to the hospital, and he didn't have major injuries, but then they took him to the hospital. She was arrested. Then she was charged with assault with a weapon. She didn't do jail time, but then she had to see her probation officer for a year. She followed all of that. Later on, she left her family home. She got a job. She volunteered. So 5 years later, she gets a letter from immigration, and she came to see me because in that letter says that she's going to be deported because 5 years ago she committed a crime. So this is very painful, right? To see that the spiral of violence is also, created by all these systems that are supposed to protect women. So only by carefully listening to the voices of racialized migrant women and by following their lead can policymakers, institutions, and social services providers change the lives of women who have suffered a spectrum of violence, as well as will be able to contribute to end violence against women. Thank you.